Hello everyone. Today we are talking about American Revolution. American Revolution started in 1765 and ended in 1783. On one side, there were American patriots, which was supported by French Empire, and on the other side, there were loyalists supported by British Empire. The people who live in America is known as Native American or Red Indians as well. They were living in America for more than 1,000 years, and they were quite different from the present Americans. Native Americans or Red Indians were hunters. They have their own culture and tradition. They have their own groups, and each groups have different language and culture. They were basically spread around the north side. Christopher Columbus reached West Indies of America in 1492. Christopher Columbus went in search of India, and according to him, he has reached India. That's why the name still is West Indies. Christopher Columbus was sent by the King of Spain. So, Spain became the first empire to rule America. Slowly, France and Britain also went to explore this newly found area. Around 16th and 17th century, the whole America was captured by Spain, France, and Britain. They were all ruled by differently. This is a map in 1700, and this is Spain colony, this is French, and this is British colony. These areas near to the ocean were British colonies, which is on the east side. Around 1607 to 1732, British made 13 colonies in America. If we just look at the map of British colony, we can see all 13 different colonies, which was later united the whole USA into one modern map. These 13 colonies were New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. European countries colonized this colony so that they can use the land and other resources for their own development. They all wanted to be strong and rich. They would bring raw materials from this colony and make the final product and sell this product in these colonies. They were all doing lots of profit and making lots of money from these colonies. For example, there were lots of cotton in America. All these cottons were taken to England. England made clothes from these cottons, which were brought back to America, and these were all bought by Americans. Now we are talking about the main reasons for American Revolution. The northern part of America was kind of different society compared to Europe. All the people who were slaves or all victims eloped in northern America and started to settle there. In Spain, the king was Catholic, so all Protestants over there were given different tortures to change their religion. So all Protestants from Spain moved to America. In the same way, the King of England was Protestant, so all the Catholic from England migrated to America. All these people from Europe came to America and created their own society, which was much more open-minded. From 16th to 18th century, there were lots of genius and scientists and found lots of new things and ideas. The way people think was changing. People began to think that why only the son of king should be allowed to be a king. New ideas were gaining rapidly and awareness began to spread. They were raising questions about their rights and dignity. During that time, all European countries were ruled by a king. During those times, all the colonies have their own rules and regulations. And from each colony, the representative was selected through the election. For example, the representatives of Massachusetts were elected from Massachusetts, but the governor were chosen by the King of London. No one has the right to choose the governor, and this governor has lots of rights and power that he can dismiss the decision of the representative that was chosen from the respective colonies. All the lower positions were elected by the people, but those who were in upper positions were directly appointed by the king. The king did not have the dictatorship in these colonies, but the problem was that there were no representative of Americans in the Parliament of London. All the laws of America were made in London, so Americans wanted their own representative in the Parliament. American representatives from American people were not allowed in the British Parliament. British government can make new laws in America, but there were no representatives from America. This was becoming a big problem for the colonies of America. But the fight broke out when the British government misutilized their power. They made such laws that were very hard for Americans to accept. After this, the revolution began to start. Slowly, these 13 colonies started to do trade between themselves. There were lots of cottons in the south, and lots of new industries began to establish in the North Colony, like New York. There were lots of industrial development. In the south, there were lots of cotton, and in the north, there were lots of factories and industries. Georgia and Carolina traded cotton with clothes from New York. All the 13 colonies slowly developed the feeling of unity. They had the same demand. They had the same culture. Their development was stopped only by the British government. British government did not allow them to do the trade freely. There were lots of obstacles created by British Empire. People were looking for the ways of free trade. They began to think that they should at least be allowed to trade freely without anyone's. They do not want any obstacle from British government. British government were making laws in these colonies for their own benefit. In 1651, a new law named Navigation Law was made by British government, which states only British ships should be used for any trade which is done between this colony and any other countries. They cannot use the ship from Spain or France, even though they were cheap. Americans were only supposed to use British ships. Now, if the cotton were supposed to export to Europe, only British ships were supposed to use. In 1660, British made another law by which sugar, cotton, and indigo were only supposed to do trade with British. These laws were all made to restrict these 13 colonies. There were another new law in 1663 by which all the trade should be passed through England. London made lots of profit from this law. London raises lots of tax in lots of different things. You can see in the map how the trade is done in North America. This is America from which oil, rice, indigo, sugars, and woods reach to England. From here, all these raw materials were processed into clothes and different food and were brought back to America. These goods were all transported to other countries through England. Lots of slaves were taken from Africa as the population of America were less. There was a lack of people who do these labor work. Although Navigation Act, these colonies were doing the trade secretly, but after 1763, these acts were made very strict and all ships were checked at different places, and all people who did secretly trade were caught and were forced to pay fine. Now all these colonies started to have lots of problems. That ignites the American Revolution was the 7 Years' War that was between France and Britain. This war happened from 1756 to 1763. This war was fought in order to gain the control in the lands of America. France lost this war and all its colonies in America, which was shared by Britain and Spain. This is a map of 1750. This is the colony of France. After 1750, the right side of the Mississippi River went in control of England, whereas the west side goes in control of Spain. The rule of France got ended after the 7 Years' War. Britain decided to tax these colonies in different ways. Britain believed that Americans got more benefits by this war by getting more land and resources, and also they got protection from Britain. So, Americans have to pay some sort of tax for this. In this war, Britain was also supported by the Native Americans who were living in America for a long period of time. But the Americans were prohibited to claim this newly won land by British from the French Empire. The people of colonies were not allowed to go across this line, whereas the people of colonies wanted to do farming in these new lands but was prohibited by British government. So, the people from the colonies has to pay the taxes, as well as they were not even allowed to cross this line. After the 7 Years' War, these colonies were forced to pay many different taxes to British Empire. King George III was the king of Britain who ruled from 1760 to 1820. He tried his best to suppress the American Revolution. The British government made different new laws. The first one was the Sugar Act 1764, which states all sugar should be only exported to England. They cannot trade with others even though the money were good. After this, there came Quartering Act, by which all the British forces in America should all be supported by America itself, and it needed Americans were supposed to provide the British force even their own home as a shelter. The British soldier can go to any house to stay at any time. After this, the Stamp Act 1764, by which all government paper, newspaper should get a stamp. This made the lawyer, journalists, and all educated people mad. Finally, there was a first protest against this act with the saying, "No taxation without representation." With all this, in 1765, in the leadership of Samuel Adams, the organization Son of Liberty was established. This organization was very revolutionary and did not step back for violence if needed. They restricted all British goods and products. They believed Americans should not do any kind of business with British government. Telephones were not invented during that time, but Samuel Adams created a committee of correspondence in each city so that people can connect with each other and share their thoughts with letters. These organizations played a major role in bringing people together and for public awareness that they should prohibit all British goods for their own good. The next law was Declaratory Act 1776. When there were lots of protests against Stamp Act, then the British government took back the Stamp Act but made new law. According to this law, Britain king have full authority to make any kind of law any times in these American colonies. American people got more furious with this law. Now, different kind of new taxes were coming for sure for American people. After this, the Townshend Act 1767, under which tea, papers, glass, lead, and paints which were used to make houses all were taxed. This ignites the feeling of revolution in each common people. This act also allowed British to search for any houses or any ships. To protest this act, there was a big protest in the city of Boston that turns into very violent and is known as Boston Massacre 1770, where 5 Americans got killed and it was publicized heavily. This even helps to ignite the revolution and creates awareness in the people to go against British government. Before, Americans were just protesting against the tax. Now, they start to fight for their complete freedom from British Empire. After this comes Tea Act 1773. All the tax that was applied through Townshend Act in paper, lead and print got removed. But there was still a tax in tea. But people still were protesting this act. American prohibited the tea, and when this tea came to America through ships in the city of Boston, in Boston Harbor, then Samuel Adams, who was the leader of Son of Liberty organization, and his friend, dressed as Native Americans, ride in those ships and pour all the available tea bags in the ocean. This was one of the important events and fuels the revolution. This event is popularly known as Boston Tea Party in the history and was happened in 16 December 1773. This was a protest against the British government. The amount of tea bag disposed in this event were almost amounts to 10,000 pounds, which is equivalent to 1 million pounds in today's rate. Till date, in the city of Boston, there is one museum, and if we go in the ships that is there, we can still act and throw these tea bags in the ocean. British government then brings Intolerable Act 1774 after this incident. People were prohibited for gathering in public places. Boston was locked down from all its surroundings. No trade was made in and from Boston. British government asked its lost money from the disposed tea bag for the arrest of Samuel Adams. The American patriots then escaped to jungle and get ready for the war. They began collecting weapons and trained people for the fight. Now they want to fight the British in the battle. Around the same time, in September 1774, all the representatives from these 13 colonies held a meeting which is known as First Continental Congress. They decided to prohibit British goods. This is the first time in the history that these all colonies decided doing anything together. Slowly, a separate government was establishing in America, and the products from America was gaining popular among people. They all decided to boycott Britain and its product. The war breaks out after a few months, and the War for American Revolution begins. The first battle took place in April 1775 in Lexington and Concord. America was led by George Washington, who later on became the first president of America. Americans will lose the war in the cities, but they all escape the village, where they again collect the people willing to do the battle and fight again. Then King George III of Britain announced Congress as a traitor. After this, Americans published a paper named Common Sense, in which the thoughts of the freedom were done openly. This was usually publicized in America, and it was well explained why America is not developed economically. This publication was almost of 48 pages. Till 1776, all these 13 colonies has removed the representative that was chosen by Britain and were making new constitution, and all these 13 colonies were representing themselves as states rather than the colony. Later, all these states were united and made United States of America. In 1776, Second Continental Congress was established. Philadelphia City announced its independence in July 4, 1776. The same date is celebrated as the Independence Day in the whole America. This Second Continental Congress now started to act as a government and took the responsibility in supplying weapons. They asked help from the France, and the French Empire provided money, weapons, and troops for the war. France wanted to take the revenge of the 7 Years' War that was lost. French were thinking to regain the control in the lost land of America. But France got weak by supporting them economically, and in 1789, there was a revolution in France as well. The war ends in October 1781, and the America got its independence from Britain. Almost 100,000 people get killed in this war, in which more than 90% get killed of disease. A new country named United States America is established. Around that time in the war, there were either a colony or a kingdom ruled by a king. There were no leaders or government elected by the people itself. People have no right to vote. In America, the leaders were now elected by the voting system of people. The son of king is no longer a king in America. The knowledge was just limited to book were applied practically. With this revolution, the revolution was spread wide around the world. In 1789, written constitution was first made and lots of rights were given to people. Although there were no rights for slave and women. Saying so, I would like to finish this topic. Thank you.